Welcome back to a special edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast, coming at you live on the YouTube channel presented by the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. Excuse me, tongue tie. That's Brant. I'm Bo. Glad to be back with you guys. Wow, Brant, a breath of fresh air, sigh of relief. The NFL draft is coming and gone. We know where our favorite players' landing spots are at this point. Here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. The draft was extremely up and down there in the first round. Sorry about the background noise, guys. It's a little warm. I got the windows open so you can hear the little breezes coming through. But yeah, that draft was crazy. We won't talk about the first round a little bit. I know some people were extremely shocked early, but they're starting to settle comfortably and understand a little bit. What was it? 14 straight offensive players, and I think 11 of those 14 were skill position players that were fantasy relevant. I think it was only 3 linemen in the 2 or 3 linemen in the top 14. So it was crazy start. And then you started seeing the domino effect fall. The wide receivers fly off the board at the end of the first, and we'll talk a little more about how all that went, and we're going to definitely dive into some winners and some big losers during this draft. But before we get into that, let's talk. We got to bring up the free agent signing that happened the day after the draft of Ezekiel Elliott. I guess the Cowboys finally found their running back, and that was one of the biggest shocks to me, and them not drafting one, but I guess we found out why. With the signing of Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, this has got to be a farewell tour, like a one last hurrah. I know there's a couple of times last year for the Patriots that it was like, okay, maybe this is still relevant. And then, the next game it was like, never mind. But we'll see. For Dallas's sake, you got to hope, or they got to hope that Zeke's got a little bit of juice left in those legs, because if not, they've got 4'2" Deuce Vaughn waiting in the wings to run the ball. So
Deuce.
Things have got to come together for Zeke and the Patriots in order for that roster to have some success this year. So obviously, from a fantasy point, it makes things relevant because Zeke probably has to be drafted in startup drafts at the very least. And if he's on a waiver wire in your dynasty league and they're not closed this time of the year, you got to be going and picking him up. So yeah, it's definitely worth talking about. I mean, man, Brant, that was one of the consensus things. And I know we get into this a little bit later on, but there were some juicy landing spots for the running back landscape to really shake out in this draft. And it just didn't happen for us the way we thought it would. A lot of those spots where it was like, if they draft somebody in the second, third, fourth round, it'll really, solidify us to who the running back is there. And those teams didn't. And other teams took running backs, and it's like, wait, what? Who did what? The Jets took who? So it was one of those things that it didn't go the way we thought it would for a lot of things. It did go the way we thought it would for a few others. But I'm definitely glad to be done speculating about it. It's draft season's in full force. You and I are in a draft at this point. We just took over an orphan team that's a couple days away from drafting as well. So it's definitely draft season. And I'm sure we will be coming out with a mock draft here shortly, post NFL draft to cover here, Brant. But I'm excited to get into these winners and losers. I've got my bib on.
And let's see.
All right, Brant, let's just jump straight into this, dive into the waters head first. We've got winners. We've got a lot of winners. There was a lot more winners, I feel like, than there was losers in this draft. I, for one, want to get it out there. I don't jump. Yes, I'm a Falcons fan. I am not touching the Michael Penix thing as a winner or a loser. It feels like a big loser at this point. We're going to wait a couple of years before we cast judgment on this pick. I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me, and that's just fine. On this show, we're not going to discuss it because I can't afford to replace my laptop after my hand goes through the screen when I get angry about people talking bad about this pick. So let's start with the winners. Brant, I'll let you go first. Tell me who somebody is that you think won based off the results of the NFL draft.
So before we get into that, I've said it a million times. I wish Michael Penix the best, so I hope it does work out for you. But let me jump into one of my winners, and that is J.J. McCarthy. By far, probably outside of Chicago, probably the best landing spot for a quarterback. J.J. McCarthy thrived off the play-action pass game, which is one of the things that Minnesota does great. And he's going in with some of the greatest weapons that you could ask for as a rookie quarterback. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson. Not to mention you also have Aaron Jones behind the line of scrimmage with you. Great blocking back. He's shown that he is very relevant when it comes to fantasy. Great for dump downs. He can make, people miss. And let's be honest. Who does he have to beat out? Sam Darnold? J.J. McCarthy, and they traded up to go get J.J. McCarthy. They had 2 first-round picks. They did a great job of saving that second first-round pick and their first-round pick next year in order to move up to go get McCarthy. And I think they did an amazing job. Great landing spot for him. I don't think he will be a week 1 starter. I think they're going to give a chance to Sam Darnold minus amazing preseason. But I do believe they will get a small chance to Sam Darnold. But I think that leash is going to be extremely short. If they fall 2 games out of first place, you could see that changing real fast there for Minnesota. But I think J.J. McCarthy is by far one of the biggest winners. I think he really solidified the best landing spot that you could ask for a quarterback.
Yeah, I agree, Brant, not only for the aforementioned weapons that you said were there, but also because J.J. is walking into – stability around his head coach and Kevin O'Connell, that when you look at the rest of these quarterbacks, the first overall pick, Caleb Williams goes to Chicago Bears. There was talks of them firing Matt Eberflus at the end of last season. So there's no guarantee he's going to have the same system, same coach moving forward. We've seen Dan Quinn do things and it not work out real fast, and he's out the door. We don't know what Gerard Mayo is going to look like as a coach at this point. So really outside of Sean Payton with Bo Nix, I think J.J. McCarthy walked into the best coaching situation as well. And like you said, Brant, there's not a whole lot of competition. If you can't beat out Sam Darnold, you probably don't need to be starting anyway. I know that there's been a lot of we don't really know what J.J. McCarthy is because he didn't have to prove it a lot in college. Yeah, that's true, but his record indicates he's the guy. He's got, I believe 3 losses since his freshman year of high school. This dude is just a proven winner everywhere he goes. And for the Minnesota Vikings fan base, I think they have to absolutely be ecstatic that he was there.
Absolutely. He may not have to prove a whole lot there in Minnesota. They have great weapons around that have no problem going up and getting the ball. So these weapons that he is surrounded with, he may not have to prove a whole lot. He may just have to prove, hey, I can stay upright and I can get the ball in Justin Jefferson's hands. That's all I have to do in Minnesota to score.
Hey, listen, I think the Purple People Eaters up there in Minnesota are going to be doing a lot of Skol this year with a lot of J.J. McCarthy up there. He's used to the weather up north. I know Minnesota's a dome team now, but still, I think this is one of the best fits that J.J. could have hoped to have gone to, Brent. I absolutely agree with you. He's a winner.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to start with my first winner, Brant, and I'm going to tell you this one is like a backhanded compliment, if you will. And this is going to be a hot take because I don't like this player at all. I love his landing spot in the NFL draft for him as a person. And I love it for us in the fantasy community, Brant. If you go back several weeks ago when you and I were talking about the combine, we talked about Xavier Worthy running 4.2140 time, setting an NFL record at the combine. And the comment was made on this show, watch, he's going to end up getting drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's going to skyrocket people in the draft like CEH did several years ago. That is going to happen in your fantasy drafts, which is just good for everybody else because that means this talent slides. These speedy guys in the NFL, I know, like, yes, it can work out. Deshaun Jackson had some great games in the NFL. Tavon Austin had some really great fantasy relevant games. Tyreek Hill has been fantastic. Tyreek Hill has a very extensive route tree. Xavier Worthy does not at this point. He's going to have to work on that. He is lucky he's paired with Andy Reid, who I think will utilize him in a lot of really nice ways, both get him the ball and use him as a diversion for other players to get the ball. And it's another great weapon for Patrick Mahomes. But if they're using this guy in only a field stretching role, which is genuinely what I think is going to happen, you're going to put him out there as a decoy on the opposite side of the field where you intend to throw the ball to Travis Kelce or Rashee Rice, barring a suspension. I don't love this landing spot fantasy wise, but as far as if you were to pick a player where this guy or a place where this guy would have went and could have been an absolute rock star, this is the best spot. If anybody can utilize his speed as an asset, it's going to be Andy Reid. So I don't think it's great for fantasy for Xavier Worthy. I think it's great for fantasy for Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice and a lot of other people. Don't think it's necessarily great for Xavier Worthy. And again, Brant, like I said, you and I both had talked about this prior to this draft taking place, that this was the type of guy that we weren't sold on. And if he went to the right spot, it would do some crazy things to the fantasy football world. And it is. Like I said, you and I are in a live draft right now, and he went, pick 108 in that draft. So he went before guys like Brock Bowers in the Superflex League and some other names. So, again, I think this situation could lend itself to a CEH situation. And I know it's like, but Bo, you said this is one of your your NFL draft winners. And it is, because if Xavier Worthy would have went to, the Jaguars or, some other team that I just don't think would have been utilized appropriately, I think he would have been a complete waste of a pick. So Kansas City was the perfect spot for Xavier Worthy, Grant.
Absolutely. I think this guy can be very fantasy relevant, but I think this is going to be a few years down the road. They're not asking him to step in and be the number one guy. They're asking him to step in and be that field stretcher, be the speed, be the gadget guy that they have. Because you think about it, Rice, barring a suspension, will be the number one wide receiver. You still have Travis Kelce there, who just signed an extension. He'll be the number one guy. So this guy gets to sit back. Yes, he's going to get playing time, but he gets to develop that route tree, develop his skills. I think this is a 2 or 3 year away from being hugely fantasy relevant. I think this is a guy in about 2 years. We're going to be like, hey, it's time to trade for Xavier Worthy because that year is coming. But it's not right now. I do believe that he does have the best landing spot for a guy of his skill set, that he will get a chance to develop it prior to being the fantasy guy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right, Brent, take us through your second.
Excuse me. My next winner, it's two people. It's Joe Burrow and Zach Moss / Chase Brown. They're both right there in Cincy. Cincy did not add another running back. So they're putting the trust in Zach Moss to be the number one guy. Yes, we saw them use Chase Brown a little bit last year behind Joe Mixon. But Cincy has committed to being a bell cow back team over the last few years. So I think Zach Moss may be in the clear. Either one could be very good because they're both one injury away from being 80, 90% carries for that team, plus pass catching. Now, Joe Burrow got added. He added a huge offensive tackle and Mims to go along with Trip Brown. They added a free agency. So Mims draft pick right there already boosted Joe Burrow. They're protecting him. We know he's had multiple injuries in his career. They added a big play, deep threat outside wideout, and Jeremiah Burton. Burton is 1 year away from being the number 2 target getter if Higgins doesn't move. Higgins already requested a trade. If Higgins goes, Burton slides instantly into that number 2 role. Boyd's already a free agent. You tell me who else is there outside of Higgins and Chase right now that's going to be coming in to take over that role. So instantly Burton slides to that 2 role as soon as Higgins leaves. We know Higgins is out the door next year. So he doesn't lose a whole lot, and he gets this deep threat. If Higgins stays, you have Chase, Higgins, then you have Burton right there. He's got 3 amazing hands to throw the ball to. And I'm not even counting the other thing that was added. They added Burrow also got a new tight end in Eric All, I believe is what it is. He's out of Iowa. Iowa produces tight ends. That's all they do is produce tight ends. Tight ends and apparently punters if you're the Chicago Bears. But this guy's good. This guy's a good pass catcher. He's a good blocker. So he'll be great. And also they added Tanner McClellan. I'm not sure if I wrote that down right, but that was another tight end out of Arizona, who is another big body guy who can block. But the one thing I want to go back to Burton and talk a little more about him. This guy can track the deep ball like one of the best receivers in this draft. He is amazing at tracking the deep ball. He got overthrown in one game. I believe it was against LSU there at Bama, where he could have went for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns had he not got overthrown so much. He beats safeties deep. He beats the corners off the line. Joe Burrow is going to have a lot of fun with this guy. And like I said, Burton's 1 year away from being the number 2 guy there. But if Higgins and them figure it all out, this is an amazing wide receiving core. So Joe Burrow is we already talked about him being a top 5 quarterback, but he is definitely a huge winner. And I think Zach Moss is too, because I think they're putting a lot of trust in Zach Moss.
When you talk about Joe Burrow, I can't believe he left off his best weapon, his true new tight end that he got this offseason, and Mike Gesicki, who I think may be the best tight end to wear a Bengal uniform since Tyler Eifert back in the day. So I'm on board with it. I like the addition of the offensive lineman and Mims out of Georgia, just a massive human being. I think that was great for them to shore up that offensive line. And yeah, Zach Moss was also really good in Indianapolis last year when he was asked to step up and be the guy. So they could be on to something in Cincinnati there. It'll be interesting to see how that offense looks after Brian Callahan left as the offensive coordinator to go take over the Tennessee Titans. But yeah, Brant, you're talking about a pair of winners from the result of the NFL draft based on protection. Really, they both stand to benefit from better offensive line play and then the addition of Burton. So yeah, a couple of winners there from the Bengals. I'm going to talk about another team from the AFC where I think there's a winner that comes from, Brant. And much like my first take, this one may be a little controversial because this player did burn a lot of us last year. He was part of the big 3 in his class. Quentin Johnston won the NFL draft, Brant, because the Chargers had every right and every reason and every available asset, I guess, if you will, to be able to acquire their wide receiver 1 of the future. They could have taken Malik Neighbors. They could have taken Rome Odunze. They could have done a lot of things, and they didn't draft a wide receiver until the 2nd round in Ladd McConkey, who I'm not saying is a slouch by any means necessary, but I do think Ladd is a very good number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Quentin Johnston should be the number 1 again this season. And he does benefit from having Harbaugh as his coach. As ignorant as this may sound, Brant, 2 years ago, Quentin Johnston really showed us who he was in a game against John Harbaugh's Michigan Wolverines in the college football playoff. So John Harbaugh has been on the opposite side of a Quentin Johnston explosion in person. Quentin Johnston's going to get another year where he's paired with Herbert, and as the 1, he should be in line for much better numbers. Last year, he had 38 receptions, 431 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. As big as he is, you have to imagine touchdown equity goes up quite a bit here. You're going to imagine that he has at least probably double and then some, if not triple, the amount of receptions just based on targets that will be out there for him this year. So I'm definitely thinking, Brant, there's an outside chance you're talking about Quentin Johnston as a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy aspect next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, he gets all that. Herbert gets all of his offensive line back. I know they were banged up. I believe they added another one in this draft too to help protect him. Oh, they did. They added the best offensive lineman in this draft in Joe Alt. And then they get the rest of their line back to protect Herbert. Herbert only played in 13 games last year as well, so he missed 4 games with Quentin Johnston. And it's proven that Harbaugh trusts Johnston to be the number 1 there by not adding. Yes, they added Rice late there. They added McConkey. They added Ladd. Let's just do it that way since I'm having tongue twister.
Ladd McConkey.
They added him, and I think that they're going to have a decent receiving core, but this guy is definitely is going up and moving up very well the draft boards, and I think very well so.
All right. Anybody else you want to throw out there as a winner real quick, even if it's just a name alone, before we move on to losers? If not, I know I'm putting you on the spot, so it's completely okay.
Coleman going to the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen. So I read on Twitter, Josh Allen gave the Bills a list of 3 guys that he wanted in this draft. Well, all 3 guys were on the board when they first traded away. I'm not sure why they traded with Kansas City. If you watch this with our live, I was in shock because last time the Bills made a trade with Kansas City, that was Patrick Mahomes. And they ended up going Coleman. I wasn't a big fan of Coleman, but I've done a little research. I've watched a lot of his TikToks. The dude makes me laugh. He's funny. He's a great. He great at his press conference. I'm excited to see his post game. But he landed in the best spot. There's over 150 targets available with Stephon Diggs leaving and Gabe Davis leaving town. There's so many available targets there. It's just going to be amazing for this guy to step up and be Josh Allen's new number 1.
Yep, Keon Coleman, love the landing spot. We talked about that one quite a bit off air. You and I did. All right, let's get into some guys who are definitely not winners based on this draft. Brant, go ahead and take me through your first loser.
I'm going to go with James Conner. They're in Arizona. They got the second best running back in this class in my mind, in Trey Benson. A lot of people did have him as the number 1. He's 6 foot tall, 216 pounds. He proved he can be a bell cow there out of Florida State. And James Conner's in his last year of his deal, and he also could easily be cut this year with only a $4.5 million in dead cap if he does get cut. So I believe James Conner is a huge loser. I think James Conner never stays healthy, and I hate saying that, but he always gets hurt. And one injury away, Trey Benson is taking over this backfield and never looking back. Over the last 2 years, 154 carries, 156 carries there in for Florida State. So absolutely, Trey Benson can carry the load. He'll be just fine. I do think that this is a guy in Dynasty, you're going to have to get up there in the first round, maybe early second, depending on how your draft goes and needs. In redrafts, I'm telling you, redrafts, take a stab at this guy late in your drafts. He'll be there because people will be all over James Conner because he is still listed as the 1. I think even leaving out of training camp and preseason, Conner will be the 1. But Trey Benson's going to take over that backfield little by little, and I believe it's going to come about midseason. This guy's going to blow up, and he's going to be one of the best league winners there this year. So in redraft leagues, please listen. Throw a dart out at Trey Benson at the end of your drafts. Worst it's going to do is you'll have somebody to drop if something does happen. But I believe Conner will end up missing some time like he normally does, and then inside Trey Benson, and he's never looking back.
Yeah, I agree. Trey Benson was my favorite running back. I think I said that a couple of times on our live coverage of the draft as well. So definitely like the landing spot for him. That was one of the few spots that I think was, out the door that a running back here is going to have a chance to contribute right away. So I like Trey Benson for sure, Brant. All right, my first loser I'm going to talk about is a guy I actually just drafted in our live draft that we have going on today. That's Drake May, Brant. And listen, I like Drake May a lot coming into this NFL draft. During the process, I thought, the argument was made that you could have really those. Not number 1 was always Caleb Williams, but number 2 and number 3 was a toss up for me between Jaden Daniels and Drake May. But when you talk about a toss up of a landing spot, I much prefer the weapons and everything that surrounds Jaden Daniels in Washington over what Drake May has. Juju Smith-Schuster, Jalen Reagor, Jalen Polk, and Javon Baker. Those are the top 4 wide receivers. Kendrick Bourne still there, I guess. And then Kayshon Boutte is your wide receiver room for Drake London. Excuse me. And you talk about in the age where when you're drafted in the first round, you're expected to come in and produce, right? There's going to be great expectations thrown on Drake May right out of the gate, year 1, go out and win his football games. He's the first quarterback drafted post Bill Belichick. So he's always going to be compared to, when Tom Brady and Belichick were in town. This guy's going to have to go out. Drake May's going to have to go out and win Super Bowls for this to be a good pick. I'm sorry. That really is what I expect of this as far as real football goes. For fantasy, does he have a chance to be inside the top 20 quarterbacks this year? I mean, I really just don't see an avenue for that personally, Brant. And then the other thing that really bothers me is the New England Patriots also drafted Joe Milton in the 6th round, and it's like, well, who cares? Joe Milton's got a big arm, and he looked explosive at times at Tennessee. Yeah, I think Joe Milton could have been a guy that could have went someplace and forced some competition. So I'm not saying this is a RG3 Kirk Cousins situation, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was.
Yeah, Joe Melton is definitely scary there. He's coming off, I believe he got banged up last year. So he's coming out a little banged up, but he's a guy that's really going to push him. I really think we're looking at the same thing, Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi again, where if May struggles for a year, they're just going to give Melton a chance. Why not? What do you have to lose? I really do. I feel like they set May up for failure, and I really did. So when we watched the draft and I was looking, I go, man, Jalen Polk, man, that's a great landing spot. Then I got to look and read, and Jalen Polk may not have even been the second best receiver on Washington coming out, and you're expecting him to be your number 1 wideout.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't sold on it. And don't get me wrong, I'm probably going to own a lot of Polk just because I want to own one of my Washington receivers this year. But I don't believe in it. I really don't. I think they set this man up for failure. And I hate to say it, and I hope I'm wrong. For a young guy getting a chance. He will use his legs a little bit, but he doesn't really have the huge explosive rushing upside that you do see. I don't like this fit. I never like a quarterback in New England, really, ever since Tom Brady. And honestly, I don't know, man. It's not going to be good for Drake May.
He lost based on landing spots. It is what it is.
I wish I was right when I said he was going to go as a 2nd overall, because I think his arm really would have been great in Washington to see, but Daniels will be all right there. So we talked about James Conner being a huge loser. Let's talk about the whole talk about the whole Panthers backfield. Miles Sanders, there's a chance to get opted out next season. And only have $2.9 million in dead cap. Chuba Hubbard's in his last year as a running back there and on contract there in Carolina. And then they went out and they drafted what I believe is the best running back in this draft, and Jonathan Brooks. I know he's coming off a torn ACL. It's 2nd round draft capital, so they're saying they like him. They like what they see out of him. They know that they have that year patience to wait if need be. The Panthers were extremely disappointed in what they got out of Sanders last year. Sanders has had injury history. Chuba Hubbard I know he has his games here and there where he burst out and you're like, oh, wait a minute, is this guy fantasy relevant? And then we go back to looking like, no, not really. I think that whole Panthers backfield lost because I believe Jonathan Brooks is going to be amazing when he gets his opportunity. And yes, I do think he will be a guy that you got to sit and wait, but he's another one that I'm taking shots late in redrafts. I'm looking for him in the 1st/2nd round of my rookie dynasty picks because I think he takes over this backfield, and he's already proven he can be a bell cow. Let me pull this up real fast. 187 carries last year for 1,139 yards, 10 touchdowns, 25 receptions there in Texas. Like I said, he's coming off a torn ACL 6 months ago. I think
how many games were those stats in, Brant? How many games did you have last year?
Pull up the game log. For some reason, it doesn't want to tell me the exact amount of games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. So he's missing what? Two games probably. Missing 2 games, had 187 carries. I believe out of those games, there was only 2 or 3 of them where he didn't have 20 carries. But yeah, this guy's amazing. He breaks tackles. He's big bodied. I really think he's going to take over this backfield the minute he gets a chance. 4 games total. He did have one. He had 12, 14, 18, and 16 in those 4 games that are under 20 carries. But this is a guy that has proven he can carry the load. Like I said, he's 6 foot, 207 pounds is what ESPN has him listed as. The draft had him listed as 216 pounds. So he's a big guy. He's over 200 pounds. He's proved that he can carry the load. He can catch the ball. He had 25 receptions. I think this is a guy that's going to take over that backfield. And he's a huge weapon for Bryce Young there. So once he gets healthy, which I think is going to be sooner rather than later, he's going to take over this backfield real quick. I think Sanders just didn't cut it with how much money they wanted to give him. He was the highest paid back last year in free agency, and he just did not cut it.
So you're talking about Carolina Panther team there that I want to continue talking about, Brant. This is a team that's gotten a lot of weapons for Bryce Young over the course of this offseason. They traded for Deontay Johnson. They draft a running back for him. They also traded up to draft running or wide receiver in the first round, Brant. They took Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina to keep him home in the hometown team here. And I have some problems with this, Brant. I love Xavier Leggett. And even though he went to a division rival, I hope this works out because the story's there. This is one of those kids that's just super down to earth. Every interview he's given, you just can't help but fall in love with the kid a little bit and what he brings to the table. However, going in the first round is not great for somebody like Xavier Leggett, who was a fifth-year senior this year, Brant, all 5 years at South Carolina. Let me walk you through his collegiate career. 2019, 9 receptions. 2020, 7 receptions. 2021, 8 receptions. 2022, 18 receptions. 2023, 71 receptions. This guy came onto the scene and exploded last year and was drafted after 1 year of success in college to a team that is desperately needing playmakers. Adam Thielen at 34 years old, I think he was last year, somewhere in that ballpark, 33, 34, was a superstar on this offense last year. Had us all believing he rewound the clock and was fantasy relevant, Brant, and pulled the wool over a lot of people's eyes. I think he still finished like wide receiver 18 or 19 in fantasy, so he was still up there, but it was like, man, if this was anybody who had some talent and some fresh legs and wasn't old and decrepit, I just don't know that Xavier Leggett's the guy just because the track record's not there. And there was some pretty good wide receivers still on the board at the time of this pick, Brant. There was, Keon Coleman was still on the board. Adonde Mitchell was still on the board. Troy Franklin was still on the board. There was plenty of names that were still on the board here that it was like, that's the guy you're going with, the very unproven Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina, which, again, I'm rooting for this kid. I hope it hits. I hope it works. And I would love to be wrong on this one, Brant, but right now I'm putting the stamp of loser on this pick.
This kid, I watched his introduction to Carolina. This kid is country as country can be. He's outstanding to listen to. He's another guy. But like you said, it took 5 years for him to break out. It took Spencer Rattler to explode on with him. This guy's skill set is so close to Jonathan Mingo. It's just like a small upgrade from Jonathan Mingo. That's it. And Mingo didn't do a whole lot with Carolina last year. It brings the question, why did you not go after Ladd and just try to replace Adam Thielen when you have that great skill set, just a hard worker? I don't like the pick. I wasn't high on this guy. I know everybody was. I wasn't high on him going into this draft. I absolutely hate this landing spot. You have to prove yourself so much. You, have to prove yourself that you're not a Jonathan Mingo replica. And then you have to try to move up the board and beat a 36-year-old or however old Adam Thielen is, hard worker. Then you got to try to beat Deontay Johnson. The path is so hard for him, and I just don't see it. I don't see it as a good pick. I don't see it in a good place. And you traded up one spot to go get him when you probably could have traded back to go get him.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Brant. I agree. All right. So again, like I said, these are just some few winners and losers from the NFL draft. Obviously, there was plenty of more guys that we could have spent time talking about, but I think you'll get a better idea of who we really think are winners and losers when Brant and I come at you with probably a 3 to 4 round rookie mock draft here, probably as early as next week, depending on how schedules allow for the two of us to get that draft completed. Heck, we may end up using a draft that we're in that we complete. So we will see it and be back with that next week, just so you can kind of see, where we think guys should be going based on the fact that the landing spots are in at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting. I need to dive a little deeper in over this next week. Now that I have this little setup right here over my chair, I'll dive a little deeper into my rankings and my tiers, and I need to start cheering them out. We got like you said, we just picked up an orphan team. That draft is this weekend, so there might be a chance that you see us cover both drafts that we're going to hopefully complete by next week. We may just cover those two next week, talk about, landing spots, and if we do like their landing spot, if we, like where they were drafted, we may just shoot those rather than doing a mock. Just because these do have little more value than mock drafts because they are in leagues. So we'll definitely come at you with some type of draft research next week. But yeah, it's an exciting time of the year. It's time to break down that film. It's no longer going, oh man, where is Marvin Harrison going to go? It's no longer. We know where he's at. Now we just got to get him to sign the paper. But that's a different story. We know where they're at. Now it's time to see where they fit and how it's going to go. Training camp start, I believe, middle of next month. Our voluntary workout. So it's that time. It's starting to ramp back up for fantasy football.
Absolutely, Brant. I think that does it for us on this week's episode. So that's all I got.
That's all I got. As always, stay hungry.
Stay fat, my friends.